Welcome to week 1 of our Sports Nutrition Intervention Research Project, Understanding the Basics of Carbohydrates. During the first week, we'll cover several topics to help further your understanding of carbohydrates and the role they play in athletic performance. We'll first briefly describe what carbohydrates are and look at two main types of carbohydrates, simple and complex. We will then move into how carbohydrates are processed in the body. This includes digestion and the absorption process. Lastly, we'll dive into how glucose gets stored in the body. What are carbohydrates, you may ask yourself? Well, carbohydrates are one of the three macronutrients alongside protein and fat. Similar to protein, carbohydrates provide 4 kcals per gram. For instance, a slice of bread, which contains 15 grams of carbohydrates, will provide 60 calories specifically from carbohydrates. Carbohydrates serve as the body's preferred energy source, fueling cells, tissues, and organs. During the digestion process, carbohydrates get broken down into glucose, which is utilized for energy. But when we consume an excess amount of carbohydrates, it gets stored as glycogen. Now that you have a brief understanding of carbohydrates, we will move into the two main types of carbohydrates, simple carbohydrates and complex carbohydrates. Let's begin by breaking down simple carbohydrates. Simple carbohydrates are rapidly digested and absorbed by the body, offering an immediate source of energy. Within the category of simple carbohydrates, you have monosaccharides, which consist of single molecules such as glucose, fructose, and galactose. Disaccharides, on the other hand, consist of two monosaccharide units linked together. For example, they include sucrose, maltose, and lactose. Examples of foods containing simple carbohydrates are honey, table sugar, fruits, dairy products, and certain breakfast cereals and baked goods. Now that we have covered simple carbohydrates, let us get into complex carbohydrates. Complex carbohydrates take longer to break down than simple carbohydrates. They provide more sustained release of energy. Within complex carbohydrates, there is one main group called polysaccharides. They consist of many monosaccharide units and are either stored or used as structure in the cell. Examples of polysaccharides include cellulose, glycogen, starch, and pectin. You can find complex carbohydrates in brown rice, oatmeal, whole wheat breads and pastas, legumes, and starchy vegetables. Now that you know the types of carbohydrates, we will jump into the digestion and absorption process. When carbohydrates are consumed, the digestive process begins in the mouth. Complex carbohydrates are broken down into simple carbohydrates. They then will travel to the stomach, where no digestion occurs, and enter into the small intestine. Within the small intestine, disaccharides are broken down into monosaccharides, such as glucose, fructose, and galactose. These monosaccharides are absorbed into the bloodstream and transported to the liver. In the liver, fructose and galactose are converted into glucose that can be released into the bloodstream for immediate energy or stored as glycogen. Since we understand the basics of carbohydrate digestion and absorption, let's shift our focus to how excess carbohydrates get stored in the body. If an excess amount of carbohydrates are consumed, they are broken down into glucose. They will get converted into glycogen. This is known as glycogenesis. Glycogen is stored in two locations, the muscle and the liver. Within the muscle, it can store 300 to 400 grams of glycogen. This glycogen can be broken down back into glucose and provide immediate energy during high-intensity or endurance activities. The liver can store 100 grams of glycogen. This glycogen can be broken back down into glucose as well. Its main purpose is to maintain blood glucose levels and brain function. The breakdown of glycogen into glucose is known as glycogenolysis. During this first week, we covered multiple topics, including the different types of carbohydrates, how they are digested and absorbed, and how they are stored. Here are a few takeaways from this session. Number 1, carbohydrates are the main energy source for the body. Number 2, there are two types of carbohydrates, simple and complex. And number 3, carbohydrates are stored as glycogen to be used as energy for a later time. We want to thank you for joining us this week. If you haven't already, follow us on Instagram at UCM Sports Nutrition 25. We will be posting daily education clips about each week. I look forward to our session next week, where we will dive deeper into the significant role carbohydrates play in enhancing sports performance.